I don't get along well with authority. That's just me. I'm a rebel one way or the other. I mean, I'll look like one, but it expresses itself in various ways.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we sit down with Rav Boruch Clinton. Rav Boruch spent 20 years as a Rebbe in yeshiva before transitioning to the world of IT. We spoke about how Rav Hirsch has been a constant, reassuring presence in his life. We talk about his prolific writing about Torah, technology, and more. He even wrote a book for Bnei Torah transitioning to the workforce, and we discuss if that book is still relevant. A quick reminder to check out starktank.org, where we feature exclusive written content. Last week's episode sparked a debate, and you can find more on that in our most recent post. So go to starktank.org and subscribe today. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Stark Tank. Baruch Clinton, welcome to Stark Tank. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
So let's start with a little bit of background. Where are you from? Where did you grow up? And how did you start out your career as a Rebbe and teacher?
I'm from Toronto, and I learned in, among other places, in Area Israel, Toronto, and I was there in Kyle for a few years, 7 years. And I was invited to go teach in the yeshiva in Ottawa, and it was just the perfect time. And of course, it's a great job, and I told him, no, not a chance. I wouldn't move to Ottawa, a little town like that. I reconsidered and consulted with my wife and my Rebbeim, and yeah, that's where I ended up for 20 years as a Rebbe in a yeshiva high school and a Beis Yaakov high school.
And then what caused you to transition away from that?
Well, in my particular case, the demographics in Ottawa were declining, and the schools were running out of talmidim, and I was getting old. It sounds funny now; I was only 50, but education in many contexts is a young man's game. You need a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I had a lot of experience, but very little energy and enthusiasm left. So I figured it's a good time to transition to something else and leave chinuch for people who are younger and more able.
It's interesting because some people sort of view the workforce in the business world as also having a similar demographic issue that older people are not as attractive to employers. Do you find that also?
I don't, because I have been largely self-employed through the last 12 years, but I know it's a real factor. It is illegal in a lot of countries for an employer to even ask a potential employee's age because of the potential for age discrimination. It definitely happens, and employers find ways to get the people they want and to filter out the people they don't want, rightly or wrongly. So there definitely is a risk. In some cases, it doesn't make any sense. For a lot of jobs, an older person would actually be better. But there's sometimes you don't hire a lot of 50-year-old hockey players, I don't think.
Right. And so for you, as you mentioned, you were young and you wanted to transition. So did you have previous training and skills, or were you learning from zero?
No, I actually strongly believe in having hobbies, even from the time when you're in a high school bacher or Beis Medrash. Having hobbies, getting good at something, being enthusiastic about other outlets, other skills. And so I personally had been into IT as an amateur for a number of years. I ran our yeshiva's networks, and I forced them kicking and screaming into Linux rather than Windows. Never regretted that. But so I'd always enjoyed the challenge of learning new technology skills. I used those skills to write books. I taught myself when I was in Kabbalah. I taught myself to program a little bit in GBasic so I could create a audiovisual experience of the second Beis Medrash according to Shitas Rashi. It actually exists. It may not, and I'm sure it's not the best ever 3D representation of the Beis Medrash, but it was the first. That I can say with confidence. So I've enjoyed the challenge. And when the came when I realized that in the next 6 months or a year, I'm going to have to transition out of chinuch, I had some skills. So I took a couple of exams, got some certification, and I was very fortunate, Chasdei Hashem, to find work actually with an IT company in Ottawa. And that was my springboard.
Amazing. And one of the things, throughout all these transitions that you told me, there's been a sort of a constant for you, whether you were in kollel or teaching or in the more professional capacity, has been writing. So tell us a little about the origins of your fascination and your connection to writing and how it serves you and how you utilize it to accomplish different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's really what I do compulsively, far more often than I should. But when I'm looking to learn a new skill or think through a difficult problem, I'll often express my learning process through writing. So I'll start writing an essay, a book, something in some form of writing. I'll start writing it as part of my process of learning. And it's as I mentioned to you earlier, the I wrote a book 5 years ago or so called "Teach Yourself Data Analytics in 30 Days." I wrote the book while I was teaching myself data analytics in 30 days. I really, at least I'm consistent. It was part of my learning process. It's the way I work. I communicate through writing more than anything else. It may one thing for sure is that writing forces you to think more clearly, and besides the communication that goes on, you can communicate with people asymmetrically and over the internet in great numbers without having to see them. But also, it is it's an excellent way to focus your mind.
And as far as writing in Torah and writing in the sort of the Jewish educational systems, which you used to be a little bit more involved in, do you think that that is underexpressed, that ability to use writing as a tool, right? If learning and understanding is one of the goals and one of the big advantages, and that is certainly something that, Rebbe and educators and administrators can get behind as a goal and as a value. So should they be doing more of that?
Yeah, although it's hard to institutionalize it, I think it's hard for a yeshiva, certainly a masifta, to create a writing course. I mean, the story has it that the Chassam Sofer introduced a writing course of sorts in his yeshiva in Pressburg. It's great. It's a great idea, but I don't think you can do it on a large scale. I think this is something that more really has to come from a person himself through motivation. You're motivated to publish a book or publish an article you want to publish in some magazine, maybe. It's really a personal expression more than institutional.
I hear that. I don't know if any of the educators in the audience would appreciate this, and maybe if you want to voice in on this phenomenon as well. I was once learning in a Belzer kollel in Beit Shemesh, and
Mhm.
I was reading. I enjoy reading the announcement boards. You can learn a lot and pick up a lot from the announcement boards.
Yeah.
And if I understood correctly from the announcement board of this kollel, they had two options for their end of week. I guess two options. Option number one was to take a little bechina on what was learned, and option number two was to write up the sugyas, write up a summary, and to give it in. Now, as someone who's in call myself, people could think writing it up, like, what's the big deal? But once you actually try to do it and try to take the sugyas that you've been learning, but difficult sugyas, and actually put them onto paper, can be very, very difficult when you actually sit down and do it. So that, I guess, allows a bit of the individuality, both because you're choosing to take that route within the kola, and even within that route, there wasn't anything specific you had to write, but it's more like do something to put to paper what you've been learning.
Oh yeah, that's if it definitely improves the learning, at least for many people it will, maybe not everybody. And it improves thinking. When some of my sons complain, they don't really when I try to get them to write something, they complain that they it's hard to focus that long, and it's a there are the barriers that make it very difficult. But those are that's what makes it worthwhile. The flip side to that, and it's not a terrible thing, it's not a scandal in any way, but the flip side is that the more people write Torah, the more Sfarim they want to publish. It's natural. If you've written it down, you want to share it. And there are always these dreams of making a fortune from it too. It the flips the downside is that the Sfarim stars are deluged with Sfarim that no one will ever learn. People print up 1,000, 500, and anybody in the business knows that they'll be lucky to sell 5 to their in-laws. It's beautiful, the Torah is good, any Torah is good, but it's not something that necessarily is the best use of one's time and energy and money to actually formally publish it. So it's a wonderful personal skill, but it doesn't always translate. The internet sort of changes that calculation to some degree because I can publish anything on the internet for free, and I'm not harming anybody in the process, but the question is only my time. Is it worth my time if only 10 people are going to read it? That's everyone has to make that decision himself.
Right, and there's obviously self-publishing, which is also sort of on the spectrum, a little bit more expensive and energy consuming than the online, but less than the formal publishing. And we've discussed on this podcast as well. And I am curious as far as the writing as a form of learning and processing information, synthesizing information. Do you write only on computer? Do you also use pen and paper? How do you find that? Because I feel like there's certainly a difference there in terms of the effect it has on the person and how they are going through it. Those two forms of writing.
Yeah, 35 years ago, 36 years ago, I actually wrote my first book in pen on paper, and I couldn't imagine doing it any other way. It's too easy to, it's too abstracted, and mistakes are going to come in automatically. When I finished writing the first draft on paper, my neighbor said, "That's ridiculous. You can't do that. We're in whatever year that was, 1985 or something, 1990 or whatever it was. He said he somehow got a hold of a computer to lend me for a while, and he set me up. It was a noisy old thing, but it was a computer. And I haven't looked back since. Barely use a pen. If I use a pen, it won't be for writing; it'll be for some other purpose. But I can't imagine writing by pen anymore. I know why people do it, but I'm. It's so fast, and there's so many tools to help the process that I can't imagine using anything else.
I certainly agree with that sentiment overall. I do find that for myself, sometimes, you can get so used to the computer that you forget that your pen and paper exists, but it can be very useful to clarify a complex topic, to chart it out, to write out some sort of basic summary. Not that I'm writing any full length post or lengthy content on pen and paper, but I think it's important to have that tool in your repertoire as well.
Oh, sure. I mean, I do brainstorming, just I do it in a little note file on the computer. I do all kinds of visual brainstorming where I'll set up the main elements of what I'm thinking about and work through them, but just digitally rather than physically. But I understand the need for it in any form.
Right. So one of the topics that you've written about is the topic that we really focus on a lot on this podcast, being a Ben Torah in the workforce. And obviously, you've had your own sort of journey. And so I wonder if you could start by telling us about Rav Hirsch and your relationship to his works and how that has sort of influenced you and your writing on these topics.
Well, Rav Hirsch, of course, is probably most famous for his Torah in Derech Eretz, which is built on the pasuk of B'chol Derechecha De'ehu, that you should know Hashem in all your ways. So my gut sense, or my go-to feeling about that program is that you do, whatever thing, whatever parnaso or whatever lifestyle you have that fits the Torah halachic parameters, you do that, but you do that by filling it and filling yourself in the process with the ideals you've learned from God's Torah. You keep the Tariq mitzvahs, you learn how to keep the Tariq mitzvahs, you absorb all the lessons of the Torah, of course, through her first thinking, and that imbues your actions in your work world, your work life, with a Torah sense, a Torah feeling. You are an honest person, and you are an effective person and a reliable person because you're a Torah person, and that impacts the way you do your job and whatever else you're doing in life and makes you a better human being. And of course, in the process, it spreads Torah. So there's no artificial barrier between your Torah time and your work time. There's no sense that you're in the Beis Medrash during your Seder, or Daf Yomi, or whatever it is, and then when you leave the Beis Medrash, you're something else. You're not. You are the same person. The Daf Yomi or whatever it is you're learning comes with you to work. And even if you're not actively involved in learning at work, but your whole essence, your thinking is all informed by all the Torah that you've learned. There can be no barriers.
And before we're going to go a little bit deeper into that idea, zoom in on it a little more. Before we do that, I actually want to take a step back and zoom out. And you were explaining something. You were telling me before something very interesting about Rav Hirsch's placement, location, identity within the sort of modern Torah landscape, and you found him to be very much a central figure beyond just this specific issue. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that more broadly, and then we'll come back to some of the work issues.
Yeah, what I didn't mention before is a joke I make sometimes, which is obviously not serious. But in a sense, the best thing about Rav Hirsch is that he's dead. But what I mean by that, of course, is not. But what I mean by that is that his world, his teachings, and his whole mindset is not impacted by modern scandals and trends and struggles, fights within the Jewish world, ideological, wars that we fight between ourselves. So all one community might face a scandal, one great Talmud Chacham might be rumored to be part of a scandal. None of that affects him. Rav Hirsch lived and died 140 years ago. I think he died thereabouts. And he died, as far as I know, scandal free. He had some run-ins and disagreements with people, profound disagreements with people, but he was scandal free. So there are many Talmidei Chachamim through history who have been scandal free, and deservedly so. But Rav Hirsch happens to be one that his system will never be tainted by anything new that comes up. There's nothing new that they can discover that'll make Rav Hirsch feel dirty or feel imperfect. I mean, he wasn't perfect, but there's no pagum on his system. So that is in a sense helpful, because no matter what happens, no matter how I change, And no matter how my relationship with the Torah world of today changes, and it does, and everybody's will, and how no matter how perhaps disappointed I can be in some leaders or some leadership styles from time to time, none of that will be affected by my relationship with Rav Hirsch. And therefore, that gives me stability. Even if I've changed my opinion on some aspects of the modern Torah world, but Rav Hirsch is there and he's stable and he's unchanging in that sense. So it gives me, as I said, great stability through what have been some times of turmoil.
And I wonder if you could tell us a little more of the times of turmoil and why Rav Hirsch's hashkafa and his works have been so resonant, specifically beyond just his clean mark of clean bill of health and of reputation, but why his hashkafa specifically speaks to you and has been an anchor for you.
Well, for one thing, the biggest thing probably is that as far from my perspective, and others may have had a different experience, and it's fine, but from my perspective, he's always turned out to be right. He's been on the right side of history from my perspective time after time, where some trends and well-intentioned trends and Torahic trends have come into fashion and gone out of fashion. I'm not going to mention names, but there's one great Talmud Chacham, a wonderful Talmud Chacham, who I was very influenced by 40 years ago. I knew a little bit. So obviously, he's a lot more modern than Rav Hirsch. So I was able to know him a little bit, and I loved the fact that I knew him and had a little bit of a relationship with him, but I certainly was influenced by him very deeply. He's gone out of he's hasn't aged well. His books are not appropriate really for our day and age, and it's a shame. I still cherish the what I learned from him, but it's over. It's gone. So Rav Hirsch, he hasn't been aged. His system, if anything, is more relevant than it was 40 years ago, and more relevant than it was 100 years ago.
As a matter of fact, I think that many people who read his Perush al Torah and his other books very much feel that is the words are very much relevant to today as much as ever. But specifically on the point where you mentioned him being sort of on the right side of history, beyond this staying power, can you just give a little more color into that as to what the positions he took that he's been proven right many years later?
Well, actually, perhaps not all positions, because I'm not that I'm really in a position to judge, but in his Ostrich-Gemeinde campaign, that is the campaign that Orthodox Jews must not belong to a kehillah, a Jewish organization that is not founded on Torah values. So that's why he fought very hard to allow Jews to leave the main kehillah, Frankfurt, to get government, they had to get government approval, a special law from the German government to allow them to secede from the Jewish Kehillah, the Reform Kehillah, even though the reformers made some allowances for their Orthodox members. They reopened the mikveh that they literally filled with cement 50 years before, and they allowed an Orthodox rabbi in the Kehillah. But Rav Hirsch held that an Orthodox Jew has to belong to a kehillah which represents Torah Judaism. So we don't have any kehillahs right now. There's almost no there's almost no community in Klal Yisrael right now that has a formal kehillah. So it's not really relevant in that sense. But the mindset that feeds, the idea that we can respect and collaborate and cooperate with non-Orthodox Jews, in fact we must, and we gain from it, and hopefully they'll gain from it, but we have to have a mindset of independence. We can't be dependent on a communal structure that is alien to Jewish values, to Torah values. And so I think, first of all, it was Yekkes, and it was specifically Yekkes from Frankfurt, who built many of the institutions in Eretz Israel and in North America that became among the most dominant Orthodox community, not all of them, but many of them. There was this independent mindset of the Frankfurt Kehillah that really was able to rebuild Torah and build Torah fresh in these new communities, new parts of the world, in ways that other communities couldn't do as well. And I think this independence, I'll tell you a hilarious story to illustrate that. And it's obviously, don't try this at home. But I used to have friends among Boyaner Hasidim in Borough Park. Wonderful people. Don't ever become a chassid, but if you do, make sure it's Boyan, right? So they told me somehow that nobody knows how this happened, but through sheer accident and negligence, one of them had a relative who was a Yeki from Washington Heights. No one knows how it happened, but they did. And so there was a family simcha. So they invited the Washington Heights family over for Shabbos. So one of the little kid, the 4-year-old kid in that family came Shabbos morning to the Boyan Klois, and he was wearing a tallis, as they do there. So the Boyaner kids like stared at him like he was from outer space. And then one of them said, "Get a kick, a kleine Hussen. Look over there, a little Hassan." So the Yekisha kid, the 4-year-old Yekisha kid, did not appreciate that. Hauled off and you know punched the Boyaner kid twice his age, knocked him off his feet, and that was the last the Boyaner said to him. Now, I'm not recommending punching anybody, but that inbred mindset, perhaps not expressed the best way it should have been, but there's something about that's confidence of a Yeki, especially a Frankfurt Yeki, which you can't replace with anything. I will note, by the way, that on a much more positive note, Feldheim Publishers, specifically through Dr. Elliot Bondi, who's a descendant of Rav Hirsch, have done a magnificent job in publishing many dozens of Hirsch books in English, not just from Rav Hirsch himself, but from his sons and grandsons. And they've got Pirushim now on almost all Tanakh available in English. And they've done a magnificent job. And I know that they are selling like mad. They publish them, they sell out, they republish them. The Feldheim Baruch Hashem is doing very well. I think they're doing reasonably well as a result. They were at risk at certain points financially, but I think they're doing better now, and I hope they do. But the point is that there are many people who are inspired by these books and keep buying them. My wife is one of them. And it tells you that even though there's no real Hirschian Kehillah anymore, Washington Heights is not Washington Heights anymore. There's no real Hirschian Kehillah, but there are many thousands of people influenced by it.
And what about, you alluded to this before a little bit, but that relationship to the outside world and there's a vast spectrum of how open-minded or closed-minded we should be, how much we should be avoiding contact and engagement with the outside world or embracing it. So what has your experience been with that as someone who sort of started within the more insular parts of the world and of the Torah world and now has moved, beyond that? So how have you found of Hirsch to be helpful in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, he gives us the heter to engage, not to just be wild and absorb everything and watch everything and read everything. There was no place in his writing where he suggests or even hints that there should be no filters and there should be no boundaries and barriers. Of course there should. Where they'll be exactly, well, that's something else. And it's very hard to define and it changes constantly. But he certainly allows for an engagement and a respect for the larger world. The famously, I believe one of my former Talmidim had a role in publishing, I can't remember, I think had a role in publishing the first English translation of Rav Hirsch's, if you want to excuse the expression, Yahrzeit speech for Schiller, the German poet. He spoke, I think it was in a non-Jewish context, he spoke about the debt we owe Schiller. I'm no fan of Schiller, but he was a great poet apparently. And Hirsch clearly respected the work and the ideas of Schiller as work and ideas, not because it'll somehow advance a Jewish cause, but he felt it'll advance a human cause which a Jew should be involved in also. Jews should take what's good, and you have to know what not to take, but certainly what's good we should take. We should engage. We should give and give what we have of value. We should share, but we should also take. Of course, the difficulty that presented was after the Holocaust, when the Frankfurt Jews were recovering and all Jews were recovering. There were decades when we really weren't interested in sharing, and for very good reasons. But that wasn't the ideal. That wasn't the way it was supposed to be. And I think now, 3 generations later, I think we're very ready to hear that message of Rav Hirsch, that there is good out there in the world. And it didn't stop with Schiller. I've written somewhere that I've made a point with my own kids, whether they listen is a different story. They're way too from, but I've made a point with my own kids and with myself that where there are clear expressions of responsibility and morality and decency and the expression of family values and good, strong families, we should celebrate those, and we should engage sometimes if there's value in those.
And I think you mentioned to me before that Rav Hirsch is not, from the circles that you came from, was not really a thing in yeshiva, which sort of makes sense, as someone who's, the yeshivas that are trying to be more insular and keep people in and try to discourage people, engaging proactively or more than is absolutely necessary with the outside world. So how did you sort of go from being part of those institutions to being a Hirschian?
Part of it is my natural, the fact that I don't get along well with authority. That's just me. I'm a rebel, one way or the other. I mean, I'll look like one, but it expressed itself in various ways. So it was easy for me to, when I felt it was worthwhile, to go against the grain. In fact, it was even pleasant. I enjoy going against the grain sometimes. I would talk to people about it. I was open. I remember I once had a conversation with Rabbi Yosef Elias, who I respected enormously. He was the author of the translation and the notes of the best available edition of Hirsch's 19 letters. So he wrote the fabulous notes that just opened up the book for everybody. Fantastic Talmud Chacham. So when I wrote my book on finding a career, he suggested that I should downplay the idea that working could be an equally valuable calling for an Orthodox Jew as learning full time. And I pushed back a little bit, very respectfully, because he was someone to whom I owed a great deal, but I would never be rude to him, I hope. But very respectfully, I pushed back a bit. I said, well, that doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of the book? The book is to demonstrate that leaving Torah full time, it's not really full time, but what we call full time, leaving Torah, learning on that level, somehow is a step down, and people give up and they're miyayesh, and they say, I'm useless, so what's the point? We don't want that. And so if you're saying that it's not quite the same, so he said, yeah, he agreed. I think Rav Yosef Elias, because of his relationships with so many Gedolim, which were very healthy relationships, because of that, though, he was a tiny bit nervous about shaking the boat and overplaying the differences between Frankfurt and the rest of Lithuania, Kovna or Vilna, if you will. And so he was reluctant, but when I pushed back a little bit gently, he kind of he said, "Yeah, you're right. Okay, keep it there, keep it the way it is." You have to be willing to push back gently and respectfully, but if you have something you believe is right, and you have the support of, actually. I asked Rosh Miller once. I think I don't think there's any problem repeating this. It was a private conversation, but it was my private conversation. So I asked him once if it was appropriate to study and then try to adopt a traditional Orthodox lifestyle as a Hirschian. I said, given that I'm a Hirschian, so is it appropriate to try to understand and then adopt a traditional Orthodox lifestyle that bypasses the innovations of the Tzfas Ari Kabbalah of the 16th century and the 17th century? Not to say they're wrong and they're not Orthodox, nothing of that sort, but it's not my approach. My approach, I prefer to be, as Hirsch was, more rooted in a traditional Orthodox approach. So is it appropriate to be different in that way? And he said, yeah. He didn't say much more, but he said he said that didn't seem to him there didn't seem to be any problem with it, as long as I'm respectful and as long as I'm not rejecting anybody out of hand, but to adopt an approach that is individual, that is different than the majority, it's fine.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about that book that you just made reference to. You did write a book for Bnei Torah entering the workforce, or they're in the workforce. And you mentioned before that, broadly speaking, your writing has been a way of sort of processing your own thoughts and learning and ideas. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the origins of that book and what some of the main fundamental ideas in there are.
Okay, so I wrote it, as I did many books, to help myself understand what I'm expected to transmit to my sons and to my Talmidim. My older sons were just getting old enough to start thinking about careers. I have my oldest son actually is an accountant now, lives in RBS Aleph. Um, but how should I present to them the choices they have in their lives, so how they can decide whether a career is the right thing, and then within that, what kind of career should they look for? So my first instinct was to see everything that Chazal had to say on the subject. Tanakh, even in as much as we can understand many psukim in Tanakh objectively without any ambiguity, which is kind of hard. But see what a Chazal say. So I collected everything I could find from Chazal and from Rishonim and Samachronim on advice or even halachas that were relevant to the work experience. And I found Plenty. There's a lot that if you look, it's there, and it's genuinely helpful. As a rule, agaritas are ambiguous, and it's impossible or very difficult to apply them with 100% certainty to any one circumstance. So, taken with that caveat, the agaritas are valuable and they can provide wonderful insight, but they're not absolute statements by and large. So, but nonetheless, I collected them and I included them in one section of the book, and then I wrote a different section, which is completely useless now, but a section about possible ideas that of careers that people haven't considered, or things that just to get your mind going. So the ideas then from 15 years ago or 20 years ago almost maybe aren't relevant now. The world has changed insanely, but the idea of looking for ideas and looking for creative solutions still exists. One thing I would actually include now, if I were to write the book again, which I will not, but as far as I can tell. But the one thing I would include now is I just noticed, as part of some of the other work I do, that in Canada, in Toronto specifically, an apprentice elevator mechanic earns on average $92,000 a year. That's an apprentice, which is mind blowing. There's some things that you really wouldn't expect to find as great careers. Granted, elevator mechanics, that career has its ups and downs, but if you'll excuse me, but it is that there are trades that will outlast the AI revolution, which is on us, and there are trades that can be very, very lucrative and also very satisfying because you're actually helping people. So those are things that are certainly worth looking for. But that was a big part of the book, was to try to help the creative process just so you can find your own place, because there's just no end of possibilities. The question is getting it, is rather than slipping into the problem that like a lot of girls, basic graduates fall into, is that they do what everyone else has done. And so you have whole cities filled with speech pathologists or speech, with the various careers that were popular. The first 5 girls who did it were great. They were just made for life. The other 5,000 after that may have had a little more trouble.
Right. So with regards to so with regards to the sort of first part of the book about looking into Chazal, looking into the Torah for ideas that should guide us, the question becomes, what are we expecting to look for? How are we expecting to approach it? Sometimes you find the Gemara certain Eitzah Tovas, good pieces of advices that you might hear from your grandpa or your mother-in-law, like the Gemara in Bava Metzia, which says to have diversified asset portfolios, a third in this and a third in that, a third in that, and you're protected against certain fluctuations if you do that. So that's one thing, but that's not really Torah, right? Torah, we're really looking for values, but then there's also Chachma, which is sort of how the world works, and that you can get from, you don't need the Torah to give me Chachma. I can go to a university professor, I can go to a secular source for that as well. So how do you approach looking into Torah? What are you trying to find there? What are we trying to do when engaging in that study?
I try to be objective, always fail, but I try to read the source rather than read into the source of what I expect to find. It's hard, very hard. In fact, I wrote a book of essays on Sefer Yeshaya many years ago. I had a lot of frustration with Yeshaya. I'd learned it a few times, and yeah, I already know about Azar Azasa. Why do you need 40 prakim to tell me about Azar Azasa? I know what's Asr. So I one time I said, no, this time I'm going to do it right. I'm going to learn it, but I'm going to keep a mafteach of all topics that he talks about a lot, where he talks about achar siyamim, or he talks about mishpat, or he talks about din. So I kept this mafteach on yanim, and when I'd finished going through the whole cycle and you're keeping my index, I then went and looked at the topics that he spoke about a lot, and I wrote essays on those large topics. And I thought it was really good. I mean, I thought the writing there was among the best writing I'd done, whatever that's worth. And I thought I'd done a great job. I gave a copy of the book to a friend of mine who's a wonderful Talmud Chacham, and he read it and he said, "Very nice. I got a question though," he said. "Was there any idea you discovered in these essays that weren't already your hashkafas before you started the study?" And I said, "I hate you," or something like that. I don't, I love him. But he's right. As much as I tried, it really was me. It wasn't Yeshaya talking, it was me talking. And I was using Yeshaya as maybe he would agree. Could be in many of these essays he would agree, but I really have no way of knowing. So that's actually been an ongoing struggle for me. I don't have a good answer to your question. How do I know which advice of Chazal for Parnasa is objective and can be applied in a concrete way? I don't know. honestly don't know. But I do know that there are some things in Chazal that before I'd seen them, I wasn't aware. And probably other people, especially younger people, might not be aware. And so it's definitely worth it. It's worth learning Torah. It's better to learn Torah than to not learn Torah.
Can you give an
Exactly how
example
we
of something that you were surprised by?
it's been a long time. It's been 15 years since I wrote that book. I honestly can't remember offhand. I mean,
Okay,
I
that's fine.
guess I guess no that I could say I know that there's something I was thinking of that I wouldn't have been surprised at all about, but I would hope that people who read it would be surprised because they don't think like me, so therefore they're wrong. Whatever. But the one, let's say the Gemara that says that you should teach your son an umanus naki bakal or kal v'naki, light and easy. So what is light and easy? So the Gemara's example is mechatet Talmud Yusa, is someone who can sew in straight lines. He makes stitches in straight lines, which I assume to mean tailor. But the idea that I think some of the Rishonim, perhaps even Rashi, I don't remember, but certainly Rishonim, there are Rishonim who say that doesn't mean that they're saying everybody should be a tailor, but that you should take the underlying form of the career of tailoring and apply that to your situation, to your context. So the idea that there are underlying themes that we have to figure out how to apply, that I suppose was something that I wasn't thinking on my own 20 years ago.
What are those underlying themes? I mean, even just taking a step back from that specific Mamar Chazal or on that one, right? I don't think
Mm.
the Torah has a say on, whether choose this stock or that stock, if I have this level of risk and that, or any one of these sort of minute business decisions. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what are the Torah values that we should be bringing into our discussions and conversations and decisions when it comes to work?
Excellent question. And to a large degree, I don't know. The again, this is part of the struggle. One thing though I do see after having learned a lot of Agadata and over the years is that everything is relative and everything is dependent on constraints. This is a value, but it's not a primary value or it's an ideal. It's something we should incorporate into our set of goals, but it doesn't mean that it trumps everything. So let's say Mikdash Charav El Mishum Bittel Tinaka Shel Rabban, Shel Beis Rabban. This is Gemara, I think, in Shabbos. So the Mikdash was destroyed because because Talmidim, little kids, weren't learning Torah. They weren't allowed to learn Torah. They weren't learning Torah. So Ein dot 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 Ella. The language of this literally means this only happened because of that. So the only reason the Mikdash was destroyed was because Tinaka Bittel Tinaka Shabeis Rabban. But actually, if you look at that Gemara, I believe there are 7 things in that list. There's 7 Ein Ella. So what do you mean? Because of all of them? Well, each one played a role. Each one was a priority that we missed, that we failed to properly absorb and apply. And therefore, so it teaches us, I suppose, that we have priorities and preferences where possible, where applicable. And we have to use our own wisdom, I suppose, to know how to apply it. I mean, that's not a very good answer, but it's really the best I can think of now. Certainly to talk it over with people. If you have access to a Talmud Chacham who knows you well, and you can have a solid conversation with him where you present the whole picture. Great, what could be better than consulting smart people? But how much of what a Talmud Chacham will tell you is from Chazal, and how much is from common sense? Interesting question. I once had a Talmud Chacham once ask me about a frum psychologist who I believe had written a book, had written a book on some psychological topic. And so the book was advertised as a Torah book on this topic, whatever it was. I don't remember really. So this Talmud Chacham asked me, so you know a bit about this subject. So tell me, how much do you think it is, what do you think about that book and how Torah, what is the Torah content? I said, well, I haven't written the book. I haven't read the book. So I can't really tell you for sure. But my suspicion is that the author is basing it on his professional experience, which is valuable, and maybe his academic experience, which is valuable. And the Torah stuff is just there as a veneer. It's like he threw in Torah stuff to make it look like a Torah, but really it's his professional, which is great. There's nothing wrong, but the Torah can be used as just a veneer.
And what do you think Rav Hirsch would have to say about this topic? What are some of his fundamental ideas as far as what the Torah values that we should be making sure to think about as we think about our career?
Interesting. I don't remember reading something specifically from Rav Hirsch on that specific topic, possibly because in Frankfurt in 1850, there weren't a whole lot of choices. There's one good thing. The Gemara does say that a person should use the umanis of his father. So ideally, you should take your father's umanis, yes, keep it in the family. But partly, as the Mepharshim say, because you're used to it. You already know the pressure points. You know what can go wrong because you've seen it in your family. And that's, by the way, why I didn't follow my father's umanis of a industrial pharmacist, because I saw what it did to him. And he told me if I ever enrolled in a pharmacy school, he would lock the door and change the key. He wouldn't let me back in the house. But there is value in sticking to your own family trade. So if you have, let's say, you live in an economy where there are only 10 trades to start with, and you got your father's, I guess it's not a topic that really needs that much iyun. So maybe Rav Hirsch never addressed it. I don't know. I don't have any memory of seeing anything on that topic.
I didn't mention this before when you spoke about, the talus. I grew up in a Yekish home and wore a talus from a very young age, although I would never have punched anyone,
No.
mainly out of fear and lack of strength. But one of the things that I was certainly brought up on was the idea of menschlichkeit and making Kiddush Hashem, representing a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So can you tell us a little bit more about that side of sort of Hirsch's approach and how that should affect our day-to-day interactions at work and in the professional sphere?
Interesting. I mean, without a doubt, I'm sure he would agree 100% that menschlichkeit is it's a way of life and a tool that should be central to everything we do. Having said that, he was a bit abrasive with his opponents. It was, I don't know how personally it was. It's been 140 years, but he had significant differences of opinion. There was apparently he once refused to go into a building in Frankfurt when he knew that the building, a big building, also the Orthodox rabbi who Rabinowitz, I think his name was, who was the official rabbi of the Reform Kehillah, official Orthodox rabbi of the Reform Kehillah, was in the building. He refused to go into the building that he was in. He was not shy when it came to dispute. How he managed his debates to keep it not ad hominem, I don't know. I assume he did, but I don't really. He tried. I certainly, but the famous letters back and forth with Reb Hamburger over Ostrad Gemeinde, those famous letters back and forth. There was some bitterness, but there was a clear effort to keep it not personal, to keep it to the issue itself. So does he discuss Bein Adam L'Chaveroi? He does in Chumash, his spiritual Chumash. He certainly expects that will be decent and warm and helpful to people. I can't remember, oddly, and perhaps to my embarrassment, I can't remember the specific examples of that, but I'm sure they're there.
And then again, what you were telling me before about sort of being an Adam Kadosh. You want to talk about that now?
Just briefly, I could. Certainly, there should be, as I said, no barrier between who you are in the Beis Medrash and who you are at work or at home with your wife or in anything you do with your children. There should be no barrier. If a person finds himself with one attitude towards Bein Adam the Makam and a different attitude towards Bein Adam L'Chavero, then he has a problem. And he has some introspection to do, and probably we all do at some points in our lives. It's easier sometimes to be nice in this context and in that context, but certainly there is the more one works on himself to become an Ish Kadosh and to be a Yarei Shemayim in the context of Bein Adam L'Makam, that to that same degree and that same energy, you should invest obviously in Bein Adam L'Chavere. That is something I don't see any debate about, really. The trick is in applying it and making it real. But really, I suppose everything, when we learn the Hirschian system, let's say, if it's a Hirschian system, the Hirschian system to the Taryag mitzvahs, to each of the mitzvahs, the way he identifies the different types of mitzvahs, idios and mishpatim, the way he identifies all of those have social aspects. His whole discussion of the Mishkan, or half of his discussion of the Mishkan, you could say, is about the relationship one has with the people around him, other people. So if one learns that but doesn't apply it in his daily activities, there's something wrong with the way he learned it the first time. It's hard, but it has to be a goal, an aspiration.
Okay, we're running low on time here, and there are so many wonderful essays that you have on your Substack called B'chol Drachecha, related to, you mentioned before, Rav Hirsch and his Ashkafa. So we'll definitely link to it and encourage people to check it out. One essay which you wrote, which is published in Cloud Journal, opens up with a very interesting point that I want to talk about, which is the historical perspective. A lot of people feel like what we face today, as far as the Ben Torah and a workforce dilemma, is unprecedented. People in other contexts also like to say unprecedented. And you have taught not just sort of Torah, but he also taught Jewish history. So tell us a little bit about how you think we should be thinking about our current situation in the historical context.
Well, very much. I mean, there was in that article in Klal Perspectives, I mentioned that the Pompeii volcano that the Vesuvius volcano that buried Pompeii and preserved everything in Pompeii. That there was a great deal of mosaic art, basically street art, in the city that we now know was absolutely pornographic. It was disgusting on any level in any culture. It shouldn't. It's mind blowing that, but happens to be that Pompeii was an active city at the same generation that Rabbi Akiva v'Chaverav went to Italy to Mibimvakesh from the Mamshalta. So Rabbi Akiva and his Chaverim must have been aware of that because it wasn't just Pompeii; it was all Italian cities probably. They must have been aware of that, and they nonetheless interacted with the world because they had to. They took their precautions, I'm sure, but they had to engage. And what they faced, I don't think, was manifestly easier than the things we face. And if they managed it, we should be able to manage it too. It's going to take hard work, but we have to make an effort. It's not impossible. We can do it.
Why do you think people say and believe that this is an unprecedented challenge, an unprecedented generation with regards to these challenges of Kedusha and Sneas?
It romanticizes our struggle and makes it feel more meaningful, so it's a nice idea, and it also, I guess, maybe rationalizes our failures when we do fail, but it's also, I think, part and parcel with the idea that the yeshiva world is the teva, the only thing that can protect us from the abyss, and if you leave the yeshiva world, you're lost, which I think is a nice idea, but I don't think it's historically correct.
Okay, let's go to our rapid fire round. 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. We're here in the summer. We have nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
I actually started. I mean, I learned with my youngest son a little bit. We're learning Sanhedrin. We've reached Perikalik now, which is loads of fun. But with the really long stretches, I actually have been taking some Nevi'im. Nevi'im I wouldn't normally have access spend the time with. So right now I'm on Shira Shirim, which technically is not a Navi, I suppose. And I just finished up Koheles, but specifically with the new Hirschian translations that are coming out. The Pirush on Koheles is by Rav Breuer. It was written about 115 years ago. He was a grandson, I believe, of Rav Hirsch. And it's astounding how Rav Hirsch not only transmitted his Torah, but actually his sons and grandsons, and sometimes even great grandsons, are able to use his principles and actually apply them to new Nevi'im that he didn't write about. It's really mind blowing how similar the style of, let's say, Rabbi Breuer is to his grandfather.
Okay, and you mentioned your connection to Rav Hirsch. Is there a particular book or work or even vort or idea that you have found has shaped you the most?
It's putting. I can't think of anything in particular. I mean, there's no question that I think actually the one that shaped me the most in some surprising ways is his attitude towards theurgy. That he writes about it twice in 19 letters, one in letter 10 and one in letter 18, where he feels that the Kabbalistic literature, the classical Kabbalistic literature, has been so badly misunderstood in recent centuries, he writes, that we really have lost access to it. But what he believes it was like a midrash, which is meant to inspire. Instead, it was used for theurgic purposes. That is, people felt that by doing the right things or saying the right things, they could control the cosmos. Rav Hirsch really doesn't like that specific idea. He doesn't reject people, and he doesn't in that context, and he doesn't push people out of Kleisfeld in any way. But he doesn't like the idea of feeling Judaism is about controlling the cosmos and controlling God almost. He feels it's quite close to paganism. So that idea actually has been behind a lot of my, if you would like to say, intellectual endeavors and projects in the last 15, 20 years. So yeah, I think that's probably the most influential.
Okay, and if you were forced to choose a new job today, maybe something that you dreamed of as a kid or something you had an itch to do, what would that be?
I'm doing exactly what I dreamt of as a kid. It's really, I mean, as a kid, I had crazy dreams and embarrassing dreams, and I was a Rebbe for 20 years, and I'm very fortunate and very grateful for that opportunity, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. But when I was actually a teenager, I really wanted to be a guy who sat and researched, believe it or not, policy issues, and published his ideas, and the ideas would be read widely. I'm not exactly Harry Potter level of popularity, but I'm doing a lot of what I really, really dreamed of when I was a kid, which is crazy because kids have such crazy dreams, and why would they come true? Well, and Baruch Hashem, B'chazdei Hashem, I'm able to make a parnasa doing something very close to what I dreamt of. So I know I have no preferred career, especially at my age.
Okay, Rav Boruch Clinton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been really fun.